And Webster is the member for Mallee, and as we finish the first sitting week of the year in Canberra, regional banking has been one of many topics on the agenda for the first sitting weekend.
Yeah, look, it has. And the Senate, of course, have approved an inquiry into banking. In the last term of government, when the Coalition had the reins, we had a banking task force which came out with recommendations that would have made change had the big banks actually worked with it. What we've seen since that task force are 86 banks closing in regional centres. I mean, seriously, one of the recommendations that was made in the task force was that the banks had to consult and do an impact assessment working with local community, local government, whoever the stakeholders are in small towns before they make the closures, and provide that impact assessment. Be transparent about this. And that only comes into force mid-2023. So what they've done in the interim is close 86 banks.
And I think there's one in your own electorate, and among others, I think Robinvale, there's been even a couple go.
Absolutely, there are two. Westpac have announced this last week that they will be closing in May, and ANZ announced a little earlier that they will be closing in Robinvale in May. And it sent the community into uproar, as it rightly should. Regional communities contribute enormously to GDP, and yet they are treated by the banks appallingly.
And I noticed even your colleague not far away, Michael McCormack, the National Party MP for Riverina, saying Judee's about to lose their branch as well. It does seem, if you're a cynic, you'd say the banks are closing them all before they face this extra red tape of having to do an impact assessment.
Well, call me cynical, because I agree with you. I think that it is an appalling series of actions that the banks have taken, the big four, to leave their regional residents, their regional customers high and dry. The reality is, Ricky, that we have older residents. We have a larger proportion of older residents in regional areas, and they're not necessarily tech savvy. They're not necessarily into online banking and understand it. And I brought the task force to Mildura, or Redcliffe actually, to meet with locals who said exactly that. They don't have the skills, they don't have computers, they don't know how to operate online banking. They just want to be able to go in and see their teller. What we have now is Bank at Post, which is a small smidgen of services that most Australia Post are providing, but it's certainly not providing that confidential teller experience or bank manager experience that people need when they're doing larger transactions, when they're doing mortgage issues to confront and manage, and loans. So, yeah, it's pretty disappointing.
Well, back on this task force that the Coalition ran, and there were recommendations from that. We'll talk about those in a moment. But the Finance Sector Union has said nationally, and even in one of our broadcast states, that that task force was a waste of time, basically, because they didn't get a Guernsey. I mean, did they get a say on that inquiry, or is it welcome having another inquiry? Look,
we welcome another inquiry because, let's face it, nothing has happened from the last one. But the last thing we need is another talk fest. They're one of my pet hates. If we're not actually going to be sitting down and talking to achieve outcomes and agreements, then let's just not do it. Let's stop pretending. The task force actually recommended that there is a support and promotion of the Bank at Post services, that they need to maintain access to cash for those people who still want to manage and, work in our legal tender, surprise, surprise, and improve support for regional customers experiencing vulnerability, of which there are many, and continue to support and improve digital connectivity and literacy in regional areas. I mean, I've got a colleague who demanded that one of the community banks who was closing in his electorate actually provided laptops and training for people in smaller towns that the bank would pay for. They did that. They stepped up and did that. Now, that's a community bank. How about the big banks consider the same thing.
Well, you've called in a statement earlier in the week that the big banks should take the action of a moratorium on any further closures. Are you confident they'll heed that request?
No, I have no confidence at all, but I'm still calling for it. They need to step up and act in integrity to regional customers who deserve better than this.
And I'm trying to get Anna Bligh, the head of the Banking Association, to respond to all this activity around regional banking. They did provide us a statement, but it really doesn't say anything strong in terms of the recommendations and whether they're working on implementing them. It just notes everything the inquiry did.
Yeah, well, nothing to say here. The issue is that Anna Bligh ought to come out and she ought to answer questions and she ought to at least consider the moratorium and call the banks to act to stop this fast closure before impact assessments are required.
Now, just lastly, in this context, the Regional Banking Taskforce, it just strikes me as odd that they're closing bank branches in regional Australia, taxpayers in regional Australia, losing their services. Yet, during the GFC, which seems way back in the rearview mirror after we've had a pandemic, but there was a lot of support, guaranteeing of bank balances to make sure the banks didn't fail. Do they have a moral obligation to keep running their branches after getting so much help to stay afloat?
Absolutely. And, there are people who, in a similar parallel story with regard to COVID, institutions such as Qantas, who should be doing a darn sight better than they are, given the support that they were provided by taxpayers. You're absolutely correct. And taxpayers deserve better. And regional communities are often, at way back in the rear vision mirror. They're not even considered by these big corporations, and they need to be.
You wouldn't have been on a Qantas flight that got postponed this morning by any chance?
Oh, could it be?
Well, we'll have to see if Qantas can pull their straps up as well.
Well, I mean, the appalling thing is that I've got an electric commitment to open an event, a tennis club in Nil. Anyone knows where Nil is, of course, people in my electorate will. And that, required getting a charter down to there just because of timeframes to match with Qantas flights, and now they've cancelled the whole thing. My electorate deserves better than that. Frankly, it's not good enough.
All right. Hopefully we'll turn our eye to Qantas maybe next time we talk. Anne Webster is the member for Mallee. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Ricky.